Joseph Smith, dynamic founder and prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as the Mormons, lay dead. A mob of over 200 men broke into this Carthage jailhouse and, with faces muddied to prevent identification, shot and killed Joseph and his brother Hiram. It was the climax to years of persecution which had followed Joseph and the church since its beginning in 1830. Some thought this would be the end of that Mormon problem. To the members of the Mormon Church, however, it ignited a refiner's fire which would mold them into a unified congregation, disciplined enough to tame one of the harshest regions of the West. It was written as the beginning of their journey of faith. Nauvoo, Illinois, a city the Mormons built out of a malaria-infested swampland in 1839. By 1844, Nauvoo had grown to the largest and most prosperous city in Illinois. Nauvoo was where Joseph and Hiram lived.
When their bodies were brought to Nauvoo, a cloud of gloom was spread over the people, and sorrow depicted on every face. My feelings were at the time that I would have rather fought the whole United States until one party became extinct than to let these brethren have been murdered as they were. But the church authorities that were left said, "Be still and see the salvation of God."
As the senior church authority, the right of leadership fell on 43-year-old Brigham Young. He gripped the reins of responsibility and began to guide the church through the rocky times ahead.
For a while, the difficulties between the Mormons and non-Mormons quieted down somewhat. But the Mormons continued building. They didn't evaporate when Joseph died, like I think a lot of their non-Mormon antagonists thought they would. The difficulties just reappeared. Those old tensions and old suspicions and mistrusts began to appear. And Governor Ford of Illinois simply felt that it would be a wise decision for the Mormons to move.
For the Mormons, being forced from the comfortable homes they built on land they cleared seemed unfair, but this wasn't the first time. Other angry mobs had driven them from Ohio and Missouri. The graves which marked the exodus from those states testified of the violence that had forced them to flee. Before the Mormons would leave Illinois, they wanted to finish their most sacred building, the Nauvoo Temple.
The other major activity in town was wagon building. So they're constructing the temple and they're constructing wagons.
In September 1845, Brigham Young made an agreement with Governor Ford that if Ford would provide protection from the mobs, the Mormons would leave Illinois in the spring of 1846. The state officials agreed. It was a migration that had been suggested by Joseph Smith in 1842 and had been in the serious planning stages since 1844. Church officials had studied the maps and writings of John C. Fremont and other explorers who had been west. The Great Salt Lake Valley seemed to be the place to build Zion. In Nauvoo, land prices plunged lower than the bottom of the Mississippi. It became a buyer's market, if buyers could be found at all. For most, the best they could do was to trade their property for items needed for the westward migration.
We have sold our place to a Baptist minister. All we got was a cow and 2 pairs of steers, worth about $60.
As the leaves of autumn gave way to the winter snows, the threats and acts of violence against the Mormons escalated. The promised protection was ineffective, and with the completion of the temple, Brigham Young felt it was time to start the westward migration.
Today we left our home in Nauvoo. All that we possess is now in our wagon. Many of our things remain in the house unsold.
Estimates are that there were, between 12 to 20,000 Mormons in the area. And this first advance company, they called it the Camp of Israel, had between 2,000 to 3,000. After they got on the road, the rest of the year sort of strung out were all these thousands of other Mormons that left Nauvoo.
It would be the end of September before the last of the Mormons were physically forced from Nauvoo. It was a matter of economics. Most didn't have the $500 or $600 needed to buy a wagon, teams, and supplies for the trek west.
My last act was to tidy the rooms, sweep the floor, and set the broom in its accustomed place behind the door. Then, with emotions in my heart, I gently closed the door and faced an unknown future. But I face it with faith in God.
On a cold, clear February the 4th, 1846, Charles Shumway's wagon creaked down Parley Street. He was the first to leave, and he was the first to meet and conquer the challenge that flowed at the end of that street, the Mississippi River. The rage that was forcing the Mormons from Nauvoo seemed to manifest itself in the ice-choked current, and more than one boat fell victim to the river's rage. By the middle of February, sub-zero weather arrived and calmed the river by freezing its surface solid. But the cold increased the misery of those who had left Nauvoo unprepared.
It is so cold I can hardly stir. No tent yet. Mr. Sessions spent $1 yesterday for cloth to make tent, but have no twine to sew it with. The wind blows. One can hardly get to the fire for the smoke.
Once across the Mississippi, they traveled some 7 miles west to a large open area near Sugar Creek. Here, they set up camp and waited for Brigham Young.
Our camp was made on snow about 8 inches deep and was a rather uncomfortable introduction to camp life, without a tent or any shelter save it be a wagon cover made from common sheeting. Here we stayed for some time, waiting for the arrival of all those who could possibly supply themselves with teams.
It wasn't until March 1st that the small city at Sugar Creek untangled itself and began to move. The trail they followed was faint. The trail they left was cut deep in the Iowa sod.
At about 2 o'clock, we were on the march with about 400 or 500 wagons. We traveled 5 miles and encamped for the night.